Hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us for episode 3 of our Microsoft EA Shakeup series. I'm Lane Shelton, my co-host Andy Bernard. Episode 3, this is sort of episode 3 and 4 go together. And we've got slide decks that go with this. So if you want to pause real quick and download if you haven't already, so you can follow along, because we're going to get kind of wonky on this one as we really dive deep into EA versus CSP. We're going to break this into two different episodes. This one is all about sort of licensing differences between the two programs, sort of the big picture stuff. And then we're going to dive specifically into product specific differences in the next episode. So this one we're going to stay kind of high level, but we are going to get in the weeds on the differences between the contracts. So just to set the stage, with Microsoft leveling the playing field with these price changes that come November 1st, where everything is moving to basically Microsoft published list price for online services, regardless of size, that changes the dynamics between the enterprise agreement and the cloud solution provider program. Both now become sort of viable for, something you should consider and think about, right? They are very different programs. The devil's in the details, and we're going to get to those details in these next 2 episodes. But definitely this is one of those things where if you think CSP is a good fit, based on what you hear here, you're going to want to get with, you want to phone a friend with your experts at SHI to really walk through this, because what we're going to show you, we kind of have an interactive version of this where we can kind of walk you through the changes in rate and rank, how they, what they mean to you specifically, so you can really get, because this is a very important decision. Microsoft made the biggest changes to licensing with these November changes than they have in the last 20 years. That closes some doors and that opens others. And now is a good time to really evaluate where you're at, especially if you've got a renewal coming up soon. So we're going to start with, in this deck, you're going to see kind of a couple of different ways of approaching this information. We've got sort of a master overview that's sort of like side by side EA versus CSP. And then we've got very specific breakdowns, but we're going to kind of leave both in there because, hey, everybody gets, acquires information differently. So hopefully between these two different sort of looks at the same thing, that'll give you the information you need to start to really start your own internal deliberations and due diligence on the CSP program. Okay. So let's start with just at the highest level, Andy. Obviously, these are completely different programs. So let's start with the agreements themselves. Like, what do you get with EA? What do you get with CSP, and how are they different?
Yeah, so the contracts themselves very different, to your point. So the enterprise agreement, it starts with a Microsoft Business and Services Agreement, so MBSA, very top level. A lot of legal jargon in there that you have to be a lawyer to kind of understand everything.
Indemnification, liability, all that fun stuff.
Exactly.
Jurisdiction.
The second document within the stack is a master agreement, so it gets a little bit more granular from there. It talks about good faith clauses. If you're acquiring or divesting more than 10%, Microsoft will work in good faith to come up with whatever the right solution to your scenario would be. So it gets a little bit more granular, but it's still very high level. And then the enrollment is actually really the more operational side, right? It's the 3-year program terms, it's the true up, it's your renewal clause, it's the contacts that are on the agreement, the online service manager, Azure manager. So it really lays out how the EA program works. In this kind of commercial EA model, it's direct. So all of this paperwork is direct from Microsoft. And then you have a software advisor like SHI to help, process and put the documents together. And then everything else that's included in the package is more of your price sheet, product selection form that sets really what that price level is, A, B, C, or D, a tax form that sets your ship to and what your taxes are going to be. Credit approval gets done directly from Microsoft. So that's kind of at a high level, everything that goes into an EA package itself. Versus CSP, quite a bit different.
So just to be clear, like with the EA, you're negotiating and executing a contract directly with Microsoft. You have a partner, an LSP like SHI, to help you with that process. But at the end of the day, Microsoft's setting your pricing. Microsoft is setting the terms. You're signing your agreement directly with Microsoft and naming us as your advisor. But it doesn't impact your pricing. CSP, very different. So let's go through the contract stack. But the biggest thing to remember is with CSP, you're dealing with a partner. So your primary point of contact would be SHI in this case, right? So like if you sign up to our CSP, we basically, become your primary point of contact. You're negotiating, you're negotiating with us directly, like we're like SHI sets the price, et cetera. So let's talk through the contract stack.
Yeah, so the contract stack itself, it starts with the Microsoft Customer Agreement, or MCA. This is actually still direct terms from Microsoft, so it has nothing to do with a reseller. It's direct pass through from Microsoft to the customer. Very similar language that you would see in like the MBSA and master level. So the similar terms, just on the CSP. From there, this is really where everything goes completely different than the enterprise agreement, because now SHI has all of our own resale terms. We have our own support. We have to provide the 24/7 support. So we have to have our own, SLAs. Those all, match what Microsoft's SLAs are. But we have to provide that because we're, selling the services to our customer. So we provide that 24/7 support. So there's a support guide that we have. And then from kind of a comparison to the enrollment, there's actually an operations guide. So it goes through like your 1-year terms, your monthly terms, if you can reduce what those are, if you can cancel or credit anything, what those terms are. So more of that operational layer. But those are all the terms then from SHI to the customer in the CSP world.
The other thing too is in an EA, your advisor, SHI is your advisor, we're there to advise, right? We help with the paperwork, but ultimately it's your paperwork. We're helping with true up reconciliations and invoice reconciliations, but ultimately those are Microsoft's invoices to you and your true ups to Microsoft. Whereas in CSP world, we play a much more active role directly. Like they're part of setting up the CSP is determining admin, SHI actually it's more of a partnership where we play a much more active role in helping you provision, deprovision, manage, support tickets, the whole 9 yards. You're very much joined at the hip with Microsoft. With SHI versus an enterprise agreement where we're more of a, like an advisory capacity. In CSP, we get in the trenches with.
Yeah, exactly. There's a reseller request that is required in CSP. So basically that is tying the customer's tenant to SHI's tenant, so that, we have Partner Center as the API, kind of the go-between. So if you want to make changes, like we can do that on your behalf, from adding licenses, increasing quantity, new products, to even assigning out. If you wanted us to be the person that actually goes and assigns the license to your end users, we can do that. So like you said, a lot more hands-on on what we can do, versus what, the enterprise agreement is kind of just being an overlook software advisor.
So at this point, like that's so radically different. I can already feel the energy coming out of the customers watching this going like, whoa, that's like totally different. Like I would rather just stick with what I got, because that's a lot of change, and we haven't even gotten to slide 2 yet. And that's a good, that's a good point. It is a very, very different program. However, again, with the pricing playing field being leveled, with Microsoft making lots of different licensing changes, and there being sort of less commitment required with the CSP program, with the baked in 24/7 tech support that you're not getting with an enterprise agreement unless you're paying separately for unified, with the more agile sort of user experience for adding and subtracting users, you don't have that complicated reservation process anymore. Everything happens much more in real time. The CSP does feel like a more modern agreement, like probably what you're used. It's a SaaS agreement. It functions much more like SaaS than the enterprise agreement. Not to denigrate the enterprise agreement, but one of the reason why we're having this podcast is because the pricing change means that this is something that you should think about. Let's look past these key differences and get into it, because there are advantages to this. We covered in some of our previous episodes about, maybe it's a time where, depending on if you're asking a lot of questions and wondering, what you're doing with the Microsoft stack, and there's a lot of uncertainty, maybe a program that you don't lock in for 3 years is, would give you more flexibility. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but the next thing to ask is like, okay, your Microsoft account team, right? We just said like SHI basically becomes Microsoft for you in a CSP, but that's not entirely true, because you still have your Microsoft rep. If you're a managed customer, meaning you have a Microsoft rep that you work with, Once you move to CSP, that your Microsoft rep doesn't pull the ripcord, right? Like your Microsoft rep's
They'll
still
still be there. Yep, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe like resource, right? They're not playing the active role on pricing,
right?
But maybe from a resource standpoint, they have technical experts and
right,
things like that they're providing. So, they will still be there if they are a managed customer. And I think in the Microsoft has kind of their two spaces on like an enterprise space and more of a small and medium space. Really, that small and medium space they're promoting to trying to get to CSP as, like you said, more of a modern volume license program versus, the EA has been around for a while. This change is coming out with the online services. Like they are shifting, where they want the customers in their programs. So but they'll still be around if they're managed today. They'll still be resources to take advantage
because in some cases Microsoft doesn't give you a choice, right? Like if you're an online services only EA,
you may not be able to renew.
Yeah, you may
like
not.
One of the
exactly
early changes in January this year. So you have to have like a Windows Server or an RDS Cal or something on there just to renew.
But the writing's kind of on the wall. Like this is going to be a permanent fixture in Microsoft's agreement landscape. So it's, now's a good time to take a look. All right. So now let's get into the weeds. So let's talk in terms, and now we're basically going to cover contract terms, right? So one of the biggest things we've already covered, enterprise agreement, you're basically making a commitment for 3+ years, right? Some EAs have a longer duration than 3 years, but the standard term, it's a 3-year lock-in and there's minimums, right? Like you're signing up a couple of things. You're signing up all users for certain things, and so there's quantity requirements, there's coverage requirements, there's a bunch of different requirements. Pretty much none of that exists
in CSP. No minimum requirements. I guess there can be 3-year subscription SKUs. I think the minimum is 100 that you have to order. So they have some little quirks like that. Dynamics has its own where you have to order like 20.
But outside of the edge cases, it's pretty much no commit.
And like the Dynamics is the same on EA. You're still going to have those same minimums. But really, outside of those, there's no minimum purchase amount. There's no standardized requirement. You really are ordering what you need. The subscriptions too, they set up to auto renew automatically. So kind of set it and forget it. That can also kind of be a con as well, right? Like if you forget about when your renewal's coming up, you wanted to make changes, we have to know about that in advance. So we either are turning off auto renew, maybe if you didn't want it, or we're just setting a reduction in your quantity to take effect at that renewal point. So that's kind of the auto renewal versus like the EA.
Let's talk for a second too, like in an EA, everything coterms.
Right?
Everything
coterms.
So you have your anniversaries, you have your true ups. It's very regimented, right? In CSP, you can coterm subscriptions.
You can,
in a CSP, but it's not like by default, right? So you could have, and it's not always advantageous to coterm. Sometimes you might have subscriptions that run with asynchronous renewal dates, which can be, which could be a pain, but it also can be a flexibility, depending on, it can be a pro or a con. So something to consider. The other thing too is the terms and conditions are locked for the duration on an enterprise agreement versus CSP.
Really it would be more so what the subscription duration that you're locked in for.
We'll cover this in a little bit more detail, but for now, CSP is like a 3-layer cake. There's 3-year subscriptions. You buy them, you got them for 3 years, right? There's 1-year subscriptions, which you can pay for annually, or you can pay for monthly. With a price up, with a 5% price increase for paying monthly. So most customers tend to just do annual, what we call annual, meaning you buy an annual term license, you pay for it annually, and you're stuck with that quantity for that term. The unique feature of CSP is you have these monthly term licenses where you can just go month to month. There is a premium, 20%?
20%, so it is a premium, but maybe it's cheaper than having it for 7 months or 8 months.
Right. If you got like temporary workers or you surge up, surge down. So figuring out CSP could be a matter of like, how do you build your cake, right? Like your base layer, which is the 3-year SKU, that's for what will not change. Like, and some people might have an aversion to a 3-year SKU. Totally get that because that's what the EA is, right? If you're moving away,
exactly.
But there might be an element to say like, okay, if we're 1,000 users and we know we'll never be below 200 users, maybe, thing is there's no price advantage for doing a 3-year lock,
There-
right? So
No.
probably, I'd say most of our customers are doing the annual SKUs, right?
Yeah.
Annuals with monthlies to supplement where they have those
Yeah.
use cases.
And the 3-year SKU really just came out a couple months ago.
Yeah. So
That
it's there.
Yeah.
But the nice thing, so it's nice to have your terms locked for the duration of the contract, unless Microsoft makes a change, like we talked about in an earlier episode, where like, suddenly they append a benefit, or, or there's a new license that comes out that's a lot cheaper than the old license. If you're stuck with a 3-year lock,
Yeah.
that could turn into an unfavorable 3-year lock. And we said that right now Microsoft seems to be making making a lot more changes than they have, over the last few years,
for sure.
So, the idea of being locked in for 3 years could be advantageous, or it could be disadvantageous.
Yep.
So this is a way to maybe hedge your bet a little bit and lock in a year at a time, so you're never like stuck for the long haul. But at the same time, if they decide to raise price and you're locked in for 3 years at the lowered price, that could be beneficial as well. But just know that those terms and conditions are locked locked under the EA.
Yep.
Not under CSP.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Let's talk about true ups. So the biggest difference, EA, you do a true up.
Yep. So we talked in an earlier episode on like getting your roadmap, selecting what products you want. If you think there's an increase there, add it before November 1st. That will lock everything in, and then anything after that is a true up. So it's locked in for that duration of your EA. No changes occur, and you have the ability to add and basically defer out when you get invoiced till your actual true up period. In the EA, years 1 and years 2, it's 30 to 60 days before your anniversary date. Right. So you can kind of delay out. You get access to the service up front, delay out your true up order, and you reconcile in that date. If you're coming up to year 3 and it's at renewal time, it's 30 days before your renewal when your true up is due. So I guess a lot of customers like the EA for that, because it's not that commitment and an invoice right away. You're maybe budgeting and deferring it out and kind of getting your ducks in a row there. So CSP, you're adding as you go. Yeah. Right. So, and then depending to your point on invoicing, maybe you're getting a monthly invoice or it's an annual invoice then. But you're always adding when you need more. Yep.
So that's a big change. You'll be sort of managing your licenses in real time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think the next part too is that feel on moving to a more modern agreement style. So the MCA and really CSP is more of a digital agreement.
Yeah.
And it has dynamic T's and C's. There's different terms and conditions, and we've already seen it when CSP was first released. They're calling the terms now legacy CSP.
Yeah.
You would buy an annual SKU, but you could reduce it whenever you wanted to. Then if you've heard of NCE or new commerce experience, those terms changed.
Right.
And it's what we know today. So your monthly, your 1 year, your 3 year, but that ability to reduce went way down from a flexibility standpoint, because they give you 7 days at the beginning of your subscription. And then after the 7 days, you're locked in for it for whatever that term is. So quite a bit different too already on CSP for the different terms that they've come out with. The EA is set and it's locked, right? So, people like that. We've seen a lot of requests on trying to get like a locked in CSP.
Yeah.
It's not how the program works.
Yeah.
So like you can't do that.
Unless you go with 3-year SKUs.
Unless you do 3-year SKUs, but then those are locked in for sure. But if, there's other changes like they did with legacy CSP to NCE, the program changes. So you can't just order, something that doesn't exist anymore. So that's why, they have the dynamic terms and conditions and kind of that more modern feel to the different programs now.
What about training and evaluation licenses for on-prem?
Yeah, so that's actually in the master agreement. So you get, I believe it's 20 copies of anything that you're already licensed for to do eval and training on. That doesn't exist on CSP. So some customers take advantage of that. I don't know how much, but it's something that the EA has that the CSP does.
We did say the devil's in the details, and we're going to give you the details here
Yep.
because you need to know this stuff. So
they do also though have like a lot of trials and different things out there,
Right.
so you could always do that.
Yeah, there is a lot more. There are trials
Yeah,
and
I think this was maybe more so on, well, I guess we say on-prem, because it's like really that's when you had less of the trials, right? You had to download, so it was maybe a project or Office, Visio, something like that, where you're doing actual training on.
Right.
So maybe not as relevant anymore.
So the other thing too, good faith clause for major change events. So EAs have a provision that says if you have some kind of like divestiture or whatever, merger, acquisition, if it moves your count more than 10%, then Microsoft will have a good faith conversation with you about what the downstream impact might be. Do you have to make changes to your agreement, renegotiate this, renegotiate that?
Exactly.
Doesn't mean they'll do anything, but it guarantees sort of having that conversation. That doesn't exist, obviously, in the terms and conditions of the CSP. But at the same time, chances are if you're doing CSP, you're doing those annual term licenses or monthly term licenses, so you don't necessarily need that. The reason for that protection in the EA is because you're locked for 3 years.
Yeah.
So, in CSP, you're locked in a year at a time, a month at a time. Unless you use those 3-year SKUs, that could be a problem. But that's why I said be very cautious with those 3-year SKUs. You would only use those for what you know is going to be stable over the next 3 years. So you have enough flexibility in the licensing itself that you don't need that clause really in CSP.
Yeah, it would be nice if they came out with kind of like the EA. Okay, it's 3 years, but maybe 1 year at a time you have maybe a reduction, but that's not the way it is right now.
Not yet. Yeah, not yet. So, Microsoft's always kind of trying to find their way with CSP and
it's evolving for sure.
It's definitely like the 3-year SKUs themselves are, a big evolution.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about billing and invoicing. We kind of covered this. CSP, you can have monthly payments, you can have annual payments, you can have a 3-year upfront payment. A lot more different types of like that doesn't exist.
Yeah, the EA
without extreme customization.
Yeah, exactly. Usually some finance terms would have to come along with that. Microsoft is 1 year at a time. You could pay up front, I guess, for 3 years. Typically we don't see that, but you could.
Yeah.
And then if you wanted, monthly invoicing or deferred payments or something like that, you're getting into the finance realm. CSP, like you said, it depends on the subscription. 3-year, they only do annual or the 3-year upfront.
Yeah,
there isn't a monthly option, so it does depend on that. But otherwise, monthly is monthly. Annual has monthly with the 5% uplift, so it's kind of like a finance charge on top of it.
Yep.
But maybe that's how you prefer to do it. And then of course we've talked about the invoicing being different. Microsoft's in the direct EA invoicing the customer. In CSP it would be SHI's invoicing.
So different invoicing channel. Let's talk about billing. A lot of large customers, especially the big customers, have multiple tenants. They might have a test tenant. They might have separate billing enrollments.
Yeah, maybe it's
for whatever. Yeah, for affiliates, whatever the reason. You tend to have sort of like this lead enrollment, and then you have these separate billing enrollments. How does that work in CSP land?
CSP requires one CSP per tenant. So you can't have like an overarching CSP and then all these like layered CSPs below that. It'd be individual tenant, individual CSP. And that's really where the reseller relationship comes in on SHI tying back to, customer tenant to actually provision licensing and things like that. So, a little bit different from a contract structure where EA, that billing enrollment is nice because all of the T's and C's from your EA flow down into that. Pricing does and everything like that. CSP is not like that, so it's individual CSP for every tenant that you have. Just the nature of how it works.
If you're dealing with SHI, obviously we'd probably extend the same price across the tenant. So it's just a difference. It's a different way of doing things, right? Like again, you've got different portal experience. You've got where you're going to have tenants that are different parent-child relationships. So it's going to be a different sort of flavor. But it doesn't mean that you can't achieve the same outcome with CSP, correct?
Yep. Just you'd have probably different admins, right, per tenant. You can get into like maybe some Azure like B2C setup and have like one master person that oversees everything. You could still do that in CSP though.
Right.
But it's just going to have an individual CSP per tenant. And then if you want to make changes, it's just going to be on a tenant by tenant basis then on making those changes. So, so custom invoicing for business units. I mean, I don't know, the EA, you really, we have kind of the half circle there.
Yeah.
You can set up billing enrollments and get individual invoices like that. That's not really the purpose of the billing enrollment. The billing enrollment is for multi-tenancy. So that's not how it's designed. If that was your reasoning to Microsoft on why you want a billing enrollment, they probably would say no.
Right.
You know, more paperwork involved, more setup on their side. I've heard them even say like the cost to have multi-tenancy and billing enrollments is more expensive.
Right.
So you can do it, not the primary purpose of the billing enrollments. And then CSP, I think this is evolving. We're kind of working on CSP 2.0 at SHI, and I think part of maybe the invoicing will evolve, and maybe we can get into some custom things. So I think they're expecting some of the change with CSP 2.0 later this year, around like end of year. And I think some of that does revolve around different invoicing structures that we can do. So
nice.
More to come on that.
Okay. Let's talk pricing now. Volume discount pricing used to be EA had it, CSP did not.
Yeah.
EA still has it on
really the on-prem
stuff. Windows Server, SQL Server, MSDM with Visual Studio.
Yeah.
What are some other big ones? RDS CALs. Like there's some usual suspects that show up on many of those big enterprise agreements, and there's still volume pricing there. But there's one interesting thing to consider, especially like if you're in the level B range. Like if you're enterprise level B, what's that? 2,400 to 59, 500, 2,400 to 6,000 seats, right? There's another way to buy servers and on-prem stuff, which is called MPSA. It's been around for a very long time. For those of you that have been in the licensing world a long time, it was the successor to the world famous Select agreement that,
Select
Plus, few of them still out there even. But MPSA is a points-based system. So and what's interesting is because technology has become so ubiquitous, there's a lot of small companies with a big server footprint, right? They got a ton of server licenses, which if they're buying them under the EA today, they're paying, like, let's say they're paying level B pricing, right? But if they were to move that to MPSA, suddenly they unlock level D pricing, which is way better because the difference in levels between subscriptions was like 2 to 3%, like A to B to C to D, 2 to 3%, swings. It wasn't as extreme. But in the old days with the on-prem stuff, it was like 7 to 9% was the difference in levels. So the difference between level B and level D, if you're buying a metric ton of SQL servers and SQL Enterprise Core, 2-core licenses and Windows Server Data Center, and you have RDS CALs for everybody, and like that can add up to a lot of savings real quick. So like if you're already kind of leaning CSP or Microsoft's not giving you a choice, depending on what your server footprint looks like, if you're B or C, moving that to MPSA, it's different. It's a different program, and we'll have to do a follow-up series on like.
I think we actually have.
Are we doing that one?
A perpetual estate.
That's right. We are. Okay. So we'll cover that later. So stick around because we're going to have another one where we're going to cover that specifically. But just know that like we've done some price modeling for customers where it's like, oh, wow, like the price increase of the online services was wiped out by the price benefit of MPSA. So that's a big thing. So, volume discount pricing, goes away for online services. It still exists outside of that, but in a different capacity with MPSA, where EA seat size determines everything, even server pricing. Whereas in MPSA world, it's points based. So you can knock it out to level D, and save some money there. So,
we've actually seen that over the last few years too on, like you said, usually it's level A, level B. Just doing a comparison on MPSA, and if you have a large server footprint, a lot of times those have been getting level D on MPSA and being cheaper.
It's a different way to buy. It's transactional. It's not, it doesn't have true up and stuff like that. But you know what? For big cost savings, put up with a lot of inconvenience for good cost savings. So, so something to think about there. Now with the level playing field, now suddenly MPSA, if your server footprint is big, which most organizations have a big server footprint, especially if they're using hybrid use benefits and all that stuff. Something to think about. And then obviously we talked about price protection. In CSP, you can get it for a year, you can get it for 3 years. EA, you've got it for 3 years. Occasionally, Microsoft will sign EA terms that are longer. Those have to be negotiated separately. They certainly exist. So, if you're looking for 5 years, right now, I don't recommend a 5-year. There's just too much change coming down. Too much change. I'm not a big fan of 5-year agreements. They tend to be very broken at the end, because like your terms start like here, but your terms are locked this way, and then Microsoft makes changes, and then by year 5, like your locked terms are here and Microsoft's here, and the difference between that and that is a lot of money. And so 5 years can be sort of. And that's not to say they can't be successful. We have some customers that are masters at it, and they are great at it. But it takes a lot of skill, takes a lot of work. So, all right. So that's pricing. Again, big differences. CSP, you're getting it from us. EA, you're getting it from Microsoft. And the volume discounting, that whole landscape has changed. So kind of throw the textbook out the window and look at it from fresh eyes. Okay. Enough said on that. Let's just talk subscription terms. Okay. So online service tenant reallocation. Talk to me about that.
So this exists on EA, doesn't exist on CSP. Essentially, you're back to the example you had. You have a lead EA and you have all these billing enrollments. If you have maybe one of your tenants that you've over allocated and you need additional subscriptions, and maybe you have another enrollment where you're underutilizing, the tenant reallocation is really taking those unused licenses from one enrollment, and there's a form that gets filled out that's the tenant reallocation, and it does a credit against that agreement for whatever it is that you want moved, and then it rebills, same pricing, same PO, everything, and it rebills underneath the new billing enrollment of where you wanted those licenses to move from. Fairly new within the last couple of years, Microsoft had this. Prior to that, you really had to wait until the anniversary date. You do a reduction on one, and then you'd increase on the other. From SA, we'll talk about that in I think the next episode. But like, you wouldn't want to reduce that because you can't get that back, right? So this helped overcome some of that, and then you didn't have to wait until your anniversary date to make any of those changes. So, middle of the year, you have overused licenses here, underused license here, right? It's just moving them across the tenants there to reallocate and use accordingly.
Right. So if you have multiple, billing enrollments and you utilize those, like let's say they're based on lines of business or they're, are different entities. That could be a significant loss in CSP. So that's definitely something that. Now, again, if you're doing annual SKUs like most people do, like a mix of annual and monthly, you still can do the swap, turn down in tenant A, turn up in tenant B. You can still do that in CSP. So
it's set time on, when those subscriptions expire.
So that's like a retro feature of CSP.
We have seen some exceptions where maybe you're moving from one tenant to another tenant and you no longer need your existing tenant. We've seen kind of like for like swaps, or if it's like maybe you're on E3 and you're going to E5 and the new tenant, something that's higher. We've seen some exceptions where we've been able to cancel in the middle of it.
Okay.
Very unique situations, but we have seen some of that. It's not anywhere near as easy as the tenant reallocation is.
Right.
But some of those situations do come up, and then Microsoft says, okay, well, you have the same services or higher services and the same quantity or higher quantity over on your new tenant that you want. You're no longer going to need them on this existing tenant.
Nice.
We'll cancel them. So there are some exceptions to that.
That's pretty cool. So okay. All right. So we talked a little bit about, like, in this sort of general subscription term section, we've got 1 month subscriptions, 1 year subscriptions, 3 year subscriptions. Obviously, in the EA, you have 3 years, right? Like you're locking in for the term of the EA. You can, in most cases, reduce on an annual basis in an EA. However, a lot of EAs do have floors that Microsoft enforces, meaning like they'll say, okay, we'll give you X, but you can't drop your E5 count below 50,000, or or et cetera. So there are a lot of terms lock-ins that a customer will exchange for some kind of an incentive, right?
Yeah, we've
that
seen Copilot's very
Right.
popular right now. With
Yeah.
that. You're going to commit to 3,000.
Yep.
We'll give you X% discount, but you can't go below 3,000.
Yeah.
So
FHI, we have a couple of those in our own enterprise agreement, because we have an enterprise agreement just like any other customer. We fight the same fights and deal with the same things, and so we
might be too.
We have some of those too.
Maybe you're at the agreement level, right? It's 2,400 at level B, right? You can't go below that.
That's a good point.
So
yeah, if you're in an EA, if you're in an EAS, you can. An EA subscription, you can,
Yep.
but then you'll lose your level B price benefit.
Yep,
So
exactly.
there are, there's more flexibility in terms of reduction. Again, when the price is the price, your ability to reduce, and especially if you take advantage of those monthly SKUs, we've seen customers get pretty creative with the monthly SKUs, right?
Yeah.
And there are even cases where you have a customer that has both an EA and a CSP, where
that's what I was just going to mention. Yeah, we've seen kind of the hybrid, maybe EAs for like the primary long-term employees, and CSP is your holiday, your flexible, like scale up, scale down on a monthly basis. So you could have them both in tandem.
Yeah. So that's kind of another, sort of a pro move there. There are some cases where a mixture, a hybrid. You have to be careful with the terms and conditions, but for the most part, we do have customers that are successfully living in both worlds. It's not perfect. It has its own set of challenges, because you're kind of doing two different processes. That means you got to manage two different processes. You got to remember it's different, different mechanisms. So that can be kind of a pain, but the savings could be huge. So, again, worth the inconvenience if the savings are there. So generally, again, a lot more flexibility. You'll also see point promos more in CSP world. Like let's give me an example of a recent promo.
Yeah, they just announced new ME3, ME5 customers, 15% on annual subscriptions. I want to say it's up to 2,400 seats. Copilot has one going on right now. I believe it's 15% for net new Copilot customers. There are minimums. I think it's only 10 to 2,400 on that. And like, I mean,
but there's a lot more promos.
Yeah, it doesn't really exist on EA, right? Unless you're negotiating that with the account team. So, a lot more promos like that. Those two I just mentioned, they actually started earlier in the year. They're supposed to end at the end of September, and they're extending those through the end of the year. So, more to come. So good.
Bottom line, more flexibility, under more baked in flexibility under CSP. But again, it's a trade-off. It's not all benefit. There are some, some downsides to that, especially like with that tenant reallocation. If depending on how you set up your enrollments in your EA, that could be a tough one.
We don't have this on here, but there's also tenant remap. Which really the difference is reallocation. You're moving licenses from one tenant to another, and you're not doing all of them. And your existing tenant probably is still around that you need. A tenant remap, maybe you're an affiliate, you've been acquired, and you want to start a data migration to consolidate your tenant to the parent. Tenant remap, you essentially would be taking your agreement, remapping it from your current setup to the parent tenant. Once that remap is done, those licenses show up in the parent's online service tenant, and you can start creating your users, do your data migration, but you'd still have your separate buying vehicles until maybe the renewal, and then you consolidate at that time. So that tenant remap is something that the EA has. I mean, CSP, you are setting it up to a specific tenant to start with. So there isn't a remap process, and that's where kind of the example I gave with the exception would come in, and maybe you start this new tenant, you don't need this old one. So that would kind of be the exception on CSP. EA, they used to give us the ability to submit those tickets, and then they took that away from us. So you have to do an Office 365 support ticket, but we can help through that because we have the form on exactly the information that they need. If you're looking at a remap, otherwise, I've seen it be kind of painful on just what does the customer tell Microsoft, and Microsoft understanding what you're asking. And then it's getting your agreement number, your PCN, like what your old tenant name is, your new tenant, like all of that kind of stuff. So those kind of details we can help out with.
All right, so last piece of this, we talked about this a little bit, agreement support. So like when we say like self-service management portal, you do have both, but it's much more modern under CSP. Like, the EA portal definitely shows its age a little. Like, like it definitely has that feel of, of a legacy system, whereas the CSP experience is governed by, and if you're dealing with us, SHI. So, it's a modern interface. But you're able to do a lot more, self-service, right?
Yep.
Doesn't mean that we can't manage it for you. Doesn't mean that that you're completely on your own. But what we've found over the years is, some customers really like that sort of self-service feature, right? The fact that you can go in and say, hey, I need 50 of this, I need 100 of these.
Yeah.
And it's quick. It's, you push a couple of buttons and it's done versus, oh my God, I got to go reserve it. And I got to go through that whole process. And I got to look at that giant list. And there's a 99% chance I chose the wrong one. And now it's going to,
did I select the right agreement?
Yeah, it's going to cost me a fortune later because or in some cases I forgot to do it. And now I got to pay the 12-month rate when I only needed it for 2 months and blah, blah, blah. You get the idea, right? Like, again, we're not casting stones we're not throwing stones at the EA, not too much, but it has its warts, right? Yeah. And this is one of them. The other interesting thing is CSP requires the partner, in this case SHI, to provide that 24/7, level 1 tech support, and that's very different than the EA. So there is a world in which you could potentially, look at reducing your unified costs.
Yeah, for sure.
By utilizing the baked in, benefit of that support. Obviously, you'd have to test that support to make sure it meets your standards. But that is a huge benefit to CSP, or can be a huge benefit to the CSP program.
I think we have another episode kind of comparing some of that to unified versus kind of third-party support. But level 1 to 4 engineers, and it's fully backed by our own unified support. So maybe if there is something that we can't fix, like we have Microsoft at the ready there. So the portal and the M365 admin portal, it does work both ways. CSP, you still can use that to manage it, but we've built the shi.com for you to be able to do that as well. But that's really where that self-service is going to come in. So very easy catalog on increasing, what you need or adding new products, and then assigning it out to the users right from the same interface if that's what you wanted to utilize. If you only use it for the self-service side, you can still use the admin center to do your provisioning and assigning it to the user. So all of that still, exists on both types. But you don't have that reservation process like the EA and going through. I mean, it's all new now too, since they've consolidated from VLSC into the M365 admin portal. So the steps are different. We kind of have that on a previous episode on those steps, but it's also going to be limited on who can do it. That's going to be the same on shi.com on who really has access to that. So,
So bottom line, EA, very different than CSP.
Yeah.
Pros and cons, big differences in potential pros and cons. It really depends on where you're at in your journey with Microsoft as to which program is going to make the most sense. Probably a good idea to educate yourself. So thank you for watching, and watch the next one because we'll recover product terms to at least educate yourself. Because like I said, sometimes Microsoft is not giving you a choice if your EA is configured a certain way, where you have to go into a program like CSP. So it's good to educate yourself on what it is. Certainly we have an exercise at SHI that kind of walks through this, but in sort of a rankings way. So you can kind of say, okay, I care about this one. I don't care about that one. I care a lot about this one. And it actually kind of gives you a score that says, hey, here's your app, your sort of compatibility score with EA, compatibility score with CSP, compatibility score at EA subscription, MPSA, et cetera. So it's not an easy decision, and it's a very weighty decision, which is why we're dedicating so much time with it, and going into the nitty gritty of this, because the choice you make, is a big one. So as always, reach out to us. We're happy to help answer any questions, and we'll get to our next episode where we'll get into the product differences, like product licensing differences, and then you'll have the complete 360 view of EA versus CSP. Thanks everybody. Lane, Andy, happy to have been able to walk you through this. Thanks all.
Thanks. See ya.